Chapter 2. Pots and Plans. Honno and Abrian stared at Carew. "I'm sorry," said Honno. "We're doing what?"
"An adventure,"
repeated Carew.
"I have it in very good confidence that you two and the rest of the Aetia have been summoned to do something very exciting and heroic. This will surely go down in history. Maybe they'll even write a book about this one day. But anyway," he said, taking back his lantern, "don't let me keep you. You'll want to get packing. I expect the others already know what's going on. Ta-ra!"
And with a final cheery wave, Carew disappeared into the trees, his lantern bobbing away like a firefly. Honno and Abrian both remained standing still. They had felt slightly lost until Carew had said that one word. Summoned. Now they knew exactly who was behind this. At that very moment the silence was destroyed by a shout from somewhere further away towards the castle. A very angry shout.
"Oh, we are we?"
Carew was right, said Honno flatly. The others certainly do know what's going on. It was quite some time before Fathom and Dulweb arrived back in Nausea. Slowly, one of them lifted a quivering hand towards the door of the entrance hall and knocked softly. The door was opened by unseen staff, revealing Tepid, dressed in a long purple dressing gown and matching hairnet. He blinked, looked them up and down, opened his mouth, struggled for the right words, then looked them up and down again. Before he could speak, Fathom wheezed.
"Your Highness will be
He swayed slightly where he stood.
"gratified to know. They said yes."
Tepid considered this sentence with a degree of analytical care, then replied slowly. "That is good." Dulweb smiled weakly. Tepid noticed he seemed a little cross-eyed.
"Is there anything else your Highness requires?"
asked Fathom, who sounded as if the air was slowly draining from him. Not for the moment," said Tepid diplomatically, gently pushing Dulweb upright with his forefinger. "I'd say you could finish for today."
"Thank you, sire,"
said Fathom, bending into what could have been a bow. He and Dulweb gently shuffled away, leaving behind a delicate smell of damp earth, grass, and possibly drying blood. Tepid remained in the doorway as they retreated until he was left quite alone. After a lengthy silence, he finally spoke. "Who said yes?" Back in Fealdnor, Morphea sat back comfortably in her favourite chair, massaging her knuckles. It was nice and comfortable, and the fire was lit. Honno, Abrian, Prince Dominator and Annie were also either seated or standing around the hearth in the castle, their shared, if slightly battered, home. Dominator, Fealdnor's confidently compact prince, was reading from a fresh poster they had found being pinned to their front door.
"The Anti-Tepid Revolution have agreed to aid the great city of Nausea in the worthiest of causes, the prevention of further precipitation on our glorious land. Therefore, they shall be absent from Fealdnor while undertaking this overseas mission for a period of time that shall be disclosed in due course. Signed, anonymous errand runners. Long live Prince Tepid."
Dominator threw the poster aside in abject fury.
"Tepid won't be living for much longer if I get my way,"
he cried.
"What kind of stupid idea is this? And who told the Nausians yes? This is insubordination, you know. I thought when you lot put me in charge, it meant I'm in charge."
"None of us said yes," said Abrian wearily. "And you are in charge, Dominator. We're helping you be in charge. That was the deal. No one can look after Fealdnor by themselves."
"You just wanted somewhere to live. It just happened to be in my castle,"
muttered Dominator peevishly. "It's Tepid's old castle. We all took it over together, and that is not the point of this conversation," snapped Honno. "And Morphea," he turned accusingly to her, "what's wrong with you?"
"Wrong?"
asked Morphea, with all the innocence of a patient predator.
"I taught those two feather-headed Nausian bureaucrats a promised lesson about coming near Fealdnor again. It was completely unrelated to the subject at hand, merely my principles." We understand why you did what you did to poor Fathom Pants and Dolweb Pants. That's just you, Morphea,"
said Annie, resting her chin atop the predator's head.
"Hono means why aren't you angry?" "Oh, because I agree with them,"
said Morphea calmly.
"I think we should go."
Dominator's outraged response left him before he could cut through her sentence. He stood there, struck dumb. Hono's eyebrows had suddenly left his forehead and run for cover somewhere in the roots of his fringe. Annie took her chin off Morphea's head and began cautiously backing away.
"I'm being serious,"
continued Morphea.
"What's more, Abrin agrees with me, doesn't he?"
She turned that same innocent expression towards Abrian. It was the kind of look vultures gave animals with broken legs. "Well..." Abrian's eyes flicked between Morphea and the rest of his friends, weighing his chances. I'd prefer not to take sides on this." Morphea stretched, cracking her knuckles one by one.
"Whether we like it or not, we can't ignore that the forest and everyone in it are going to grow gills if this rain doesn't stop. It is our duty to sort out problems like this, isn't it?"
Dominator scowled, not meeting her eye.
Yes, but..."
"We don't need nausea telling us to do our job," said Hono, arms folded decisively. Morphea arched an eyebrow.
"Evidently we do,"
she replied.
"I know we've all been working hard,"
she added before anyone could interrupt.
"but walkways, new roofs and covered crops are only stopgaps. They won't sort out the real problem. Now, our two little friends were carrying some rather interesting information about this mission."
She pulled a large sheaf of crumpled scrolls from the Nausean satchel she'd been sitting on.
"I've read them all. Tepper believes that the rain is being caused by an actual thing. It's not just irregular weather. And if it's an actual thing, then it can actually be stopped."
Hono sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Morphea, I know Tepid is better than he used to be, but it's ideas like these that got him booted out of Failnor in the first place."
"Make no mistake, I thought this sounded very Tepidish too,"
said Morphea.
"But he's right." "How do you know?"
demanded Dominator. "Because I've thought of exactly the same thing," said Abrian, speaking up at last. "And a little bit more, in fact." Hono rotated on the spot to glower directly at Abrian, arms still folded. "Go on." Abrian cleared his throat. "I've had a hunch this weather wasn't natural for some time. I kept measurements of all its winds, temperatures, quantities, all the clever things you wouldn't notice. I brushed it off as the tail end of a very large storm, but it was thanks to Pippa that I reached my epiphany."
"Little dragony Pippa?"
said Annie, puzzled.
"What does she know about weather?"
"She's a lot smarter than you give her credit for," said Abrian defensively. "Particularly when it comes to her bath times. I won't pretend she likes them." He ignored Hono, who rolled his eyes. "But it was the most recent bathing time when something incredible occurred. I'd accidentally let her water go a tad cold. Now, Pippa defends herself by heating up from the inside. As I lowered her into the chilly water, she got particularly hot and bothered. As she warmed up, all the water turned to steam." "You mean it evaporated?" said Hono, still unimpressed. "Glad you're paying attention, Hono," observed Abrian happily. He always had an unfortunate talent of patronising anyone he explained things to. Hono very dearly wanted to hit Abrian with something, but stayed composed. "When all the steam hit the ceiling," Abrian continued, blissfully unaware, "it condensed and began dripping great droplets everywhere, even on my head. That was when it struck me. This is what's happening with our weather." Dominator wrinkled his nose.
"Some idiot's giving a dragon a bath." "He means something out in the sea," said Morphea steadily. "Far away, where it's much colder, is warming the water up. The wind's taking it over to us in clouds, and it's falling on us as rain." "But it's the sea!"
squeaked Annie.
"It's not just a little bathtub, and Pippa could never warm up a whole sea. She's too tiny."
"I know," said Abrian patiently. "Whatever it is out there, a big sea dragon, an ancient monster, I don't know what it could be, but it is going to be bigger, a lot bigger."
And because we got rid of the sea dragon that had been sleeping underneath Tepid's castle, the Nausians think we're the best people for the job,"
said Morphea. Dominator snorted.
"I bet we were at the bottom of their list." "I bet we weren't even on their list,"
sniggered Annie. Morphea folded her arms.
"Like it or not, Abraham is probably right, which means Tepid is right too."
There was an uncomfortable silence. Morphea looked satisfied, but Honno wasn't giving up without a fight. He sat down firmly. "I'm sorry, Morphea. I'm not going off searching for some strange giant thing that may or may not be sitting in the middle of the sea just because his nibs in Nausea and Abrian happen to have the same idea."
"Oh, yes, you are,"
said Morphea. Her voice was calm, but her eyebrows hinted at storms brewing. "Am I?" growled Honno, sounding braver than he felt. Morphea smiled.
"Yes, because he said so."
And she pulled a very nervous Carew forward. He had been standing unnoticed and quiet by the fireplace for some time. Inside him, a furious battle was in full swing between two opposing forces. His excitement at being in the middle of a tense debate about adventures, and his sense of self-preservation which was warning him he was about to become a hearthrug.
"Carew already told the Nausians we would say yes,"
said Morphea, patting him on the shoulder happily. Dominator and Honno glowered at Carew, who paled.
"It all sounded very exciting,"
he stammered through an apprehensive smile.
"Why did you have to say yes to those two Nausian buttcakes?"
fumed Dominator, jumping furiously to his feet. Carew's feet, to be precise, so he could glare at him nearly eye to eye.
"They just approached me, asked if I knew you,"
Carew spluttered, self-preservation gaining the upper hand.
"I said, yes, of course. I know you all very well. They both looked so miserable, so I asked what was happening. They explained Honno had shut the door in their faces. I said that's completely normal and told them not to worry about it. They told me all about their orders, and it sounded like such an incredible adventure that I said the ATR would be glad to do it, and that made the two Nausians very happy. It was only when Morphea caught me later I realised maybe I didn't think to ask if you said yes before I said yes."
He slowed down as the full realisation of what he'd done blossomed before his eyes.
"Off with his head!"
howled Dominator. "Oh, get a grip, Dommy. Carew clearly just got carried away," said Abrian, pulling Dominator back into a chair. "Didn't he?" he added meaningfully, looking at Carew, who looked ready to flee up the chimney. He nodded like a rag doll by way of a reply. "But I said no!" snarled Honno through gritted teeth.
"The Nausians are already on their way back to Prince Tepid,"
said Morphea.
"After the goodbye I gave them, I expect they travelled quite fast."
Honno had never felt so betrayed. There was no way around it. Morphea had beaten them into a corner, and no matter how much he argued or shouted, this adventure was going to pick him up and carry him along with it. He hunched his shoulders, drew in his knees, and scowled at Morphea, chewing his tongue in an angry silence. "Lucky for you we are going to go," said Abrian, gently frog-marching Carew towards the door. "But please," he added in a low voice of mingled warning and kindness, "be very careful next time." Carew nodded frantically and scuttled through the door, looking very relieved. Just before it closed, he poked his head back through.
"Oh, would you like me to let GA and EA know? I didn't get to tell them." "No need,"
said a voice from the rafters. Giogi Aluiciuous was upside down, floating around the large wooden beams of the roof. He'd obviously been there for some time, enjoying looking down on the conversation.
"Show off,"
muttered Dominator.
Great!"
Carew grinned nervously, backing out of the door.
"Hope it all goes well, and good luck, and yes, good luck."
And the door snapped shut behind him. Annie looked up at GA.
"Have you been up there all this time?" "I was hoping Delilah fixed the roof when we heard shouting,"
the ghost replied.
"Hello."
Delilah's head appeared from behind another rafter.
"Sorry, I couldn't help overhearing."
"That's very kind of you to fix our roof, Delilah," said Abrian, craning his neck to see them better. "You don't have to do that."
"I know,"
said Delilah as she carefully made her way down a rickety ladder.
"But I feel a debt of gratitude towards you lot, and since I've been coming here more often, I thought I could make myself useful. I'm not bad at mending things."
She hopped neatly down from the last step.
"Not bad?"
exclaimed Clea, floating down to join her.
"She's really good at it. You should see the progress we've made on the leaks."
Delilah went a little pink and mumbled something about it being nothing, really. Morphea eyed the pair of them shrewdly.
"Perhaps Delilah should come too,"
he said.
"We'll need all the help we can get. GA's probably going to come, and it's near impossible to separate them these days anyway."
Clea went a little invisible at the edges, although there was definitely a smile underneath all his floating hair.
"Me? Go on a mission?"
spluttered Delilah, flushing an even deeper shade of pink. "No one's coming, because we're not going!" Honno was standing up again, and clearly had wanted to say this for some time. Morphea stood up too. She wasn't quite as tall as Honno, but she didn't need to be to make a point. She looked him dead in the eye.
"Then you can stay here. I am going. So are Abrian and the others,"
she added flatly. Abrian felt he should hardly have been surprised that Morphea had made his mind up for him. He sighed and shrugged at Honno. After all, if there was a chance any sort of bizarre creature with a potential appetite for failed notions was involved, it was inevitable he was going to go.
"I'll come,"
chimed in Annie, waving an arm in the air.
"I want to see the sea."
Her windmilling arm accidentally hit Dominator on the head. He ignored her, sinking deep into his chair and not looking at anyone. Morphea looked from the prince to Honno expectantly. Dominator sank several inches deeper. Honno folded his arms tighter. Surely this was ridiculous. There was a very strained silence. Morphea didn't move.
"Do you want to help our home, Fealdnor, or not?"
Great, thought Honno. Now she's used the F word. Sure enough, guilt twanged inside him like a bowstring, strumming the arrival of his defeat. No to Morphea meant no to their home, no to everyone in it, and no to the duty they'd given themselves as the anti-tepid revolution to take care of it. How dare Morphea turn things on them like that? He and Dominator exchanged looks.
"All right then,"
mumbled Dominator. Morphea gave him a smile, then dropped it as she turned back to Honno. He heaved a great sigh. "It will be really annoying if I die."
"Don't worry, I'll keep you company,"
said Clea cheerfully. Honno ignored him and stomped up the stairs to pack. Morphea took no notice of him as she rolled up the sheafs of parchment, stuffed them into Abrian's arms, and headed to her room, leaving the others in her wake. Annie was, as usual, 10 times more enthusiastic than anyone else.
"Well, we'll need food,"
she trilled, seizing Dominator's arm.
"Come on, we've got to make loads. I'll eat most in the first hour, and you'll help. Who knows how long we'll be away for, so we've got to make enough so no one will notice. Hurry up, Dommy!"
With an impressive effort, she pulled Dominator free from his chair and hauled the reluctant prince to the kitchen. As Abrian watched them leave, he was struck by a sudden thought. "Delilah, could I ask a favour?"
"Of course,"
she said. Abrian hitched up the scrolls in his arms as they made a bid for freedom. "Could you speak to your mother about what's happening? If we leave, will she have to do any extra guardian duties?" Delilah's mother was known as the White Queen, a rather strange and secretive being who, until quite recently, most people had forgotten about. Delilah had unwittingly set her free from a string of magical pearls which he had imprisoned her in a long time ago. Now the White Queen was free to be the guardian of Fealdnor, protecting the forest and everyone in it. The ATR and Prince Dominator had initially wondered if that meant they would be out of a job. But the White Queen had never said anything against what they did if they ever saw her, which wasn't very often. These mysterious beings were always fond of wandering off.
"I don't think it will bother her,"
said Delilah casually.
"Truthfully, sometimes I think she just lets you think you're in charge."
Thanks, said Abrian, not quite certain if this was a good thing or not. Delilah smiled.
"I'll check anyway. She really won't be pleased if you never come back."
"Won't she?" asked Abrian hopefully. I can never tell with her if she's pleased or not. She's always so inscrutable all the time. Delilah shrugged.
She is what she is. I just get to call her mummy.
I know some strange people, muttered Adrian, picking up the satchel Morphea had left on her chair. Now where did I put Pippa? Snapping Turtle will have to stay, but that dragon is coming with me whether Honno likes it or not. Oh, he added, straightening up. Don't forget to ask if White Queenie will let you come too. We'd be happy to have you along, and I'm sure Gie would. He grinned knowingly as he headed up the stairs. Delilah stood looking wide-eyed.
On an actual adventure? Are you sure?
She said, sounding cautious but barely able to contain the excitement rising up from her toes. Of course, came the shouted reply from the top of the stairs. Delilah stamped her feet in a little dance of happiness.
I've never been on an adventure, at least not intentionally. I'd love to do something useful for Feldnor instead of just hiding in it.
She turned to Gie, her eyes bright.
And you're coming too? I hadn't thought about that. I assumed the others were just teasing,
said Gie, taken aback.
I'm not really sure what I could do. Neither am I, but I'm going,
said Delilah happily. You are coming with us, Gie, called Adrian, striding back down the stairs with Pippa the dragon under one arm and smoking sheafs of parchment under the other. We all know you will anyway. Gie said nothing and looked rather sheepish, though inside he felt very pleased. Not to mention you take up the least room, don't eat anything and travel lighter than air, Adrian went on. I mean that in the best possible way, he added kindly.
I know you do,
said Gie, smiling. Ever since the recent dramatic events involving Gie, Delilah, and the evil doings of Key, the ATR had been making a concentrated effort to make the ghost feel as normal and appreciated as possible. Gie hadn't objected to this in the slightest. By the way, said Adrian, holding Pippa aloft as he dropped more scrolls, where is your brother? Gie blinked, perplexed.
EA? He's been asleep by the pillars since before you all got back. Hadn't you noticed?
He pointed. Sure enough, his twin brother EA was seated at the foot of one of the pillars, fast asleep, a small stack of books beside him. Would you look at that? Always has to be doing something odd, muttered Adrian, strolling over and giving EA a sharp tap on the head. EA! Another tap or two. We've got an adventure to do. EA stirred without opening an eye. Wherever you go, I follow, he said sleepily. Excellent! Adrian grinned, very relieved at the lack of argument. He stood up and headed for the kitchen, Pippa still biting at the parchment. Gie watched as his brother started to snore and folded his arms thoughtfully.
What's on your mind?
asked Delilah. Gie floated backwards a little, indicating she should follow.
It's just odd,
he said.
There's an unspoken rule in the ATR when you're in the castle, never sleep where you're an easy target. It developed ever since Annie started late-night magic practice. EA was always reminding me not to take naps in the main hall. Now he's doing it himself. Do you think there's something wrong with him? asked Delilah.
Gie shrugged.
Nothing more than usual.
Delilah rolled her eyes and made to cuff him on the head. Gie ducked and cuffed back, his hand going straight through her. EA shifted slightly and they hastily stopped.
Then maybe he's just tired?
Delilah suggested eventually. Gie furrowed his brow, thinking hard. This wasn't the first time he'd found EA dozed off recently. In fact, it was becoming a regular occurrence. Something was going on, and he couldn't think what it could be. Delilah watched him closely, eyes narrowed. He turned to her.
Investigate?
She nodded.
Investigate.
Night had firmly established itself over Feldnor, and the rain still persisted as it had done all day. Inside the castle was pitch dark save for one light that illuminated the window to the right of the heavy front doors. These made no sound as a hooded figure made their way through them. Paying no attention to the intensifying raindrops, they immediately set off over the moat and disappeared into the forest. The canopy, weighed down with all the water, caved around the path like a dark tunnel. The only light not provided by the top-lit clouds from a far distant and far drier moon was the approaching glow of a familiar house tree next to a bloated stream. Inside, Aunt Bolivia was reclining in a comfortable chair, but her silently tapping foot gave away a hidden impatience. With a burst of cool night air, the front door swept open, revealing Mogwing tightly wrapped in a shawl and out of breath. The hooded figure behind her stopped in the glare of the firelight, looking as if they weren't breathing at all.
"Here we are,"
Mogwing puffed, disentangling herself from the shawl as she came in.
"He walks fast."
Sorry. The figure pulled back their dripping hood to reveal a very uncomfortable-looking EA.
Not to worry.
Bolivia waved his apologies aside, bustling out of her chair and taking Mogwing's wet things.
"Give Mog your cape or it'll drip on the floor."
Behind Bolivia, Betrin and her younger sister Tessa stayed seated, their faces stony.
Now, you two,"
said Bolivia.
"Pull yourselves together. You look like you've seen a ghost. No offence,"
she added kindly to EA, who was keeping his eyes firmly on the gap between the floor and the door, as if calculating a feasible escape route. Tessa caught her mother's eye and seemed to regain some composure. Standing up, she gathered together a pile of clothes from the table and strode past EA. "This way," she said curtly, marching towards the passage that led to the rest of the house. EA was still fumbling with the cape buttons. Tessa widened her eyes emphatically for him to hurry up as he handed it to Mogwing.
"It's just like GA's,"
she said, examining the cape as she hung it on a vacant hook. "He imagines what he wears," muttered EA. He had to get the idea from somewhere. Tessa cleared her throat impatiently. "This way?" With EA following, she made her way down the passage until they reached the very end, where a circular window was set in the centre of the wall, illuminated by a candle beneath it. A narrow arched doorway to the right opened into a pantry with a low, beamed ceiling. Strung along the beams and walls were numerous pans, cooking pots, drying plants, and ropes of shallots and onions. Shelves were stacked with bunches of hedge garlic, shotweed, watercress, and charlock. There were jars labelled bilberry, crabapple, blackberry, damson, and blackthorn. Jugs and bottles held cordials, syrups, and tonics. Baskets of cobnuts, along with beech nuts and sweet chestnuts, sat above a large tub of mushrooms, and several decent-sized barrels which held barley, millet, and oats. Amidst this well-organised clutter, one large pot remained out of place, sitting on the floor at the back of the pantry. Tessa stood in the doorway, her arms folded. "It's us!" she called into the pantry. "Make yourself presentable!"
"Humph!"
said the pot. Tessa turned back to EA, who had remained in the doorway. "Well, she's over there," she said with a sharp wave of her arm, not letting her eyes off him. Taking the furthest route through the door away from Tessa, EA shuffled over to the pot on the floor. Inside the pot was nothing but water, or so it seemed at first. On closer inspection, however, amidst the ripples was the nose, mouth, hair, and rather embarrassed eyes of Gina. EA crouched beside the pot, and she glanced his way, but his eyes were fixed on the wall beside them. With a gentle scuttle of droplets, Gina carefully reached out her arm. It was completely liquid, and the wall behind her, though slightly distorted, could clearly be seen through her. The shape of the limb held together as if it was in an invisible bottle as she reached out of the pot. Beside her, EA held out his arm as well. At the tips of his fingers, wisps of green magic floated like smoke from an extinguished candle. As their fingertips met, the green magic became brighter for a moment, then dimmed, and Gina's watery form began to change. Liquid was replaced with skin, nail, and bone, and colour flooded the clear water like ink. The change spread from her fingers to her arm, and continued further as Gina, holding EA's hand to steady herself, began to grow up out of the pot into her normal shape and form. Her flaxen hair fell almost to her knees, her face was akin to Tessa's, though a little older, and her tail was strong with thick brown fur. Still keeping his eyes on the wall, EA helped her step out of the pot, leaving it looking as if it had been empty for days. "And she's back to Gina again," announced Tessa humorlessly, throwing the clothes she had brought to her sister, who caught them and began quickly dressing. "Let's hope that magic lasts better this time," she went on, shooting another look at EA, who had begun edging his way back to the door, but then stopped dead. "Sorry," was all he could manage to say. Gina continued pulling on her clothes without a word's contribution. The atmosphere was thicker than treacle. EA was now beginning to feel really quite desperate to leave, but Tessa had not budged from her guard post in the doorway. "I heard it's possible to make a stone with magic in it, or that's made of magic somehow. Something like that would be far more useful," she said disdainfully, speaking to the room at large. "We certainly wouldn't have so many accidents like these. I did hear there was someone in the forest who could do that sort of magic, certainly with red magic." Gina suddenly shot a dark look of warning at her sister, but she didn't seem to notice. "He's dead," said EA, no less quietly. "Oh," Tessa sighed, disappointed. "And there's no one else around at all who has green magic?" "No," said EA. "Pardon?" "No." Tessa narrowed her eyes, looking between EA, who was becoming paler by the minute, and Gina, who was defiantly focusing on a mushroom she had started nibbling. When nobody else spoke, she folded her arms with a "hum." Sensing the unpleasant silence beginning to descend once more, EA gave a tiny cough. "If it's all right, I will be going home now." Making himself as thin as possible, he squeezed his way through the doorway past Tessa, who was taking up most of it, but didn't move. Finally through, he disappeared back down the passage as quickly as he could without running. Tessa watched his retreat unblinkingly. Only when she heard the latch on the front door click shut did her shoulders relax, and she turned back to Gina, a much softer look on her face. "You all right?" she asked. Gina nodded, gnawing on the mushroom stem and staring hard at the wall. She looked as if she were contemplating a difficult puzzle. When she said nothing else, Tessa cleared her throat. "Ahem." Gina looked round as if suddenly remembering her sister was there. Tessa raised her eyebrows. "Nice mushroom." Gina looked down at the chewed remains of the stem.
"Oh, here, you have it."
She flicked it at Tessa, who ducked and flicked it back with a giggle. Meanwhile, EA was putting as much forest between himself and Aunt Bolivia's house as possible. Reaching a clearing, he stopped and leaned back against a dark beech tree, heaving a sigh of mingled relief and weariness. This was not how he had intended to spend his nights. Ever since she had broken out of the netherworld, Gina had been having trouble maintaining her physical form. Normally, if someone escaped the netherworld alone and without outside help, they became a ghost. But as soon as Gina had pummeled the fabric of reality into submission and set one foot in the living world, her magic had instinctively reacted to protect her from this fate and engaged her element, a tricky magical maneuver usually only achieved with a lot of hard work and practice. Her body became completely liquid, as if made of water. Unable to undo the state she was in, Gina had spent several days in one of the forest's streams, following its current until it led to the moat of the anti-Tepid Revolution's castle. Despite some impressive attempts to flag any of the ATR's attention to her situation, it was still a long while before a hunch had led EA to find her, diving into the moat to save her. He had used his green magic to neutralise her state, restoring her to her proper physical form. The ATR had got quite a shock when they arrived back at their home to find Gina lying beside the moat, fully grown and alive. She had certainly let EA know how very, very angry she was with him for not rescuing her from the netherworld and for attempting to forget about her. But she had also been overjoyed to see Abrian and Gia, who had long been her friends. Restored to her family, things had looked as if they would end peacefully for Gina. But every so often, her magic had taken over, and she would melt back into Water Gina. This seemingly happened at any time, leaving her feeling suitably ridiculous while one of her sisters was dispatched to fetch a miserable EA, who, as it turned out, was the only living green magic user in all of Faelnor. EA had always found dealing with most people a challenge, preferring to be buried in a book rather than joining in. The ATR were his only friends in the world, and even then he kept an insular distance. Having to be repeatedly summoned to the home and family of the person he had once accidentally killed was about as comfortable as sleeping on a pillow full of spiders. What was worse, thought EA, slumping further against the damp bark of the tree, it was taking up time. Time he desperately needed for something else. Something that was just as worrying and persistent as the rain pattering on the leaves above.
Hello!
EA nearly jumped out of his skin as a voice spoke from out of the darkness, and almost fell over as he spun around to see who it was. But it was Bligh, floating with his hood up beside the edge of the clearing.
You're stealing my dress sense,
he remarked, eyeing EA's hooded cape. EA relaxed, relieved it wasn't anyone fetching him back to Bolivia's house. You don't need your hood up, he said. You know rain doesn't make you wet. Bligh shrugged.
Force of habit, I suppose.
EA sighed, shook his head, and began to make his way back into the forest, heading in the direction of the castle. Bligh hovered alongside him, maintaining a casual silence. It's a bit late for you to be out here, isn't it? Asked EA after a while. Bligh smiled.
It doesn't bother me,
he said.
I quite like the rain. Besides, we've got the ATL's mission to think about.
So, you're going too? EA asked.
Of course I am,
Bligh replied cheerily.
I would never miss a chance to point out where you lot are all going wrong, or to worry about the huge mess the ATR always makes.
He chuckled. EA smiled wanly and continued walking. Bligh watched him carefully. Close up, he could now see just how exhausted his brother looked. Bligh had always known he himself was the better-looking twin, but right now his brother was looking even worse than Bligh usually thought. Something was definitely going on beneath the surface. He thought he'd seen one of Honno's cousins leading EA when he had left the castle earlier. Bligh had followed them from a safe distance. It wasn't hard to travel unnoticed when you could move through everything you came into contact with. After pursuing them for about 20 minutes, he'd seen them reach Aunt Bolivia's house. Any muffled sounds he'd heard through the walls didn't help piece together any clear ideas about the situation. So he had waited in the gloom outside until, after a short while, he saw the front door opening again and EA making his way out as fast as he could. Perhaps it wasn't anything at all, but a part of Bligh still wondered. After all, it was similar to what he himself had done once, sneaking off to see someone significant in secret. Could this mean...
So, you're seeing...
he began, but just then he stopped himself. Maybe this wasn't so simple. He and his brother weren't completely alike after all. Maybe he was just getting his hopes up. Even so, he liked to hope. EA was looking at him again, wondering why he'd paused. Bligh noticed and quickly changed tack.
So, you're going back to the castle?
EA nodded. If I can. Bligh had braced himself for the familiar narrow-eyed glare, some sort of suspicion about why he'd obviously tailed him, but none came. EA kept plodding along. Bligh felt slightly taken aback, but shook it off as good luck.
Then I'll come too,
he said, faking a yawn.
Got to be up early in the morning after all.
I suppose so, said EA, and gave a little smile back as the pair continued on their path without another word through the rain-soaked shadows of the forest.